healthcare, education and Act 46, the budget deficit, economic decline, wind energy, and opiate addiction are all major issues that are having an effect in the lives of all Vermonters. That is why the race in 2016 for governor is extremely important. And for that reason, Fact TV, in partnership with The Commons, The Eagle Times, The Shopper, The Brattleboro Reformer, BC TV, and Wool Radio, is presenting to you Fact TV's Gubernatorial Highlight, where we interview all the candidates who are running for governor so that you can see where they stand on the issues that affect your life and the future of Vermont. In this episode, we'll be interviewing Sue Minter, who is running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Get to know her and where she stands on the issues.
Hi, this is Fact TV's Gubernatorial Highlights. Today we're here with Sue Minter. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
This is a series of shows we're doing to highlight the gubernatorial candidates and get their opinions on the latest issues and what they want to do about them in Vermont. Sue, welcome again today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and why you want to be governor, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, I'm a working mom of two great kids, and they've both been through our public schools here. I feel privileged to have raised our children here I live in Waterbury Center. And I have been very active in my community for a long time, serving on the Early Childhood Learning Center Board, volunteering in our schools. I coached youth soccer for 13 years.
Yeah.
Then I served on our Waterbury Planning Commission and on our downtown revitalization. Worked for 10 years in the Department of Housing. I've actually been in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, but have spent most of my career in public service.
Yeah, and you were in the legislature too, right?
Yes, I then served 6 years in the legislature.
Yeah.
I was elected to a fourth term, but then I was asked to run the transportation
that's right.
agency.
Yeah.
First as the deputy and then as the secretary. And I've been managing the second largest agency of state government with a workforce of 1,300 people, very diverse workforce, and a budget of $600 million.
And you were in charge of the Irene recovery.
And that's right. In the middle of my tenure was Tropical Storm Irene, which, I know this part of the state was hit very badly.
Right.
For me, in the very beginning of the emergency, I was at the leadership of the transportation agency, and I'm sure you recall, we had 500 miles of road and hundreds of bridges out.
The most disruptive segment of the area, at least here, was transportation. All the roads were wiped out. We couldn't get home, pretty much.
We had 13, to wake up, and, I was getting messages throughout the night, both from members of my community evacuating their homes in chest-deep water, but also my team, all around the state, calling in and reporting the bridge is out. The road is gone, because the road workers, I call them the road heroes, are out all through the night putting up detours to make people
There were
people
some
are
really
safe.
creative detour signs. I can remember people had coffee cups up and saying, go this way.
I know. It was a crazy time, and it was a chaotic time, and it was quite an experience to wake up and head to headquarters. And those of us who could get there, of course, government was closed, but the leadership team gathered and assessed that we had 13 communities totally cut off.
Right.
And it was our job, really, to mobilize very quickly and to innovate all the time. And we had, within 48 hours, we had 3 incident command centers set up and went to work. We redeployed 700 people who were just sacrificing all and giving it their all for 24/7 for 12 weeks. And I'm incredibly proud of the work they did. Within 4 months, we really put those roads back together.
It was really pretty amazing how fast things came back together, so that people could get back to work, people could get just food and water, and really a great effort.
Really
Thank you.
keeping our economy going, keeping open for business. Every east-west corridor, Route 9, Route 30, was severed. Route 4, 131, the 131, the Cavendish Canyon. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was. You look over and it was just extraordinary. And for me, it was, I think, the seeds of, why I'm running. To be having that experience of working with Vermonters in our toughest times, and also seeing what's possible when people
Right.
come together around a united mission the way our entire state did to get us back on our feet.
Yes, it's true. So, well, some of our best times, I think, is.
Well, in
I mean,
crisis.
in looking back, is that people came together and everyone was working together, and it was really something.
And that's what
Yeah.
inspires me.
Yeah.
After we finished getting all the roads put together, we met our last goal, which was to get every road maintainable, open and maintainable for winter. We did that on December 31st. Route 107 was the last mile, and we
Wow.
had a celebration. And that's when then I was asked to become the Irene Recovery Officer. So taking over from Neil Lunderville, who had
Yeah.
started that mission. And that was when I really came to this part of the state more, because I was having to not just focus on roads and bridges and all of the town's infrastructure, but homes, 3,500
Yeah.
homes damaged, people dislocated from their homes, whole communities. My own community of Waterbury was like a ghost town. Wilmington was one of the hardest hit, and I was in charge of the long-term recovery for the state. And I did that for about 13 months. Yeah, it
Good
was
job.
an incredible experience.
Yeah. So here we are. We're coming up to and actually a historic election in Vermont. And at no other time has so many head positions or leadership positions been up for election. How do you feel about that? I mean,
Well, I think change is great, and it can be tough, and that's why I think you need a strong leader. I think you need a leader like me, who has had real experience in the legislature, with working with folks from both sides of the aisle, making change happen, but then having the experience of working in the executive branch, running the second largest
Right.
agency, making government function. I've given my life to public service, and that's because I believe in government. I believe that it's necessary and that it should function well.
so how do you think? I guess two things. Irene was a big challenge, and it brought everyone together. What do you see as a galvanizing challenge that you could, as you took office, you could bring out and say, this is what we need to work on, and these are the things we need to do, and this is how we can come together to do it?
Well, I really am focused on three things. Focusing on building greater economic opportunity. Second, making sure we support working families, making sure we have the opportunity for livable wage jobs. And three, the environment, making sure we continue to invest in renewable energy and the green economy, and address what I think is our greatest challenge of our generation, which is global climate change. So I have specific proposals for each of those three areas, and I'd love to chat with you
Sure,
about
yeah,
them.
yeah.
I mean, just let's begin with the economy.
That's a
You
good
know,
place to begin.
I think that's on
Economic
everybody.
development is really important, and I guess I would hope that we could talk about the economy south of Route 4.
Absolutely, because I've spent a lot of time
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in Windham County, in Windsor County, in Bennington County, in Rutland County. And I'll tell you, it's an extraordinary experience to really get to know all of the parts of this state in a way that I never had before. Of course, I've been on almost every road and under many,
Yeah,
many
yeah.
bridges, especially during the emergency. But to talk with people, as I've been, whether it's social workers or educators, business leaders, town officials, healthcare providers, that's how I'm educating myself.
Right. And what do you see as our challenge? Or,
Well, I see that way too many Vermonters are struggling just to make ends meet in an economy that I think is really stacked against them. And wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. And I think we need to change this. And I think people need a champion. So in terms of growing economic opportunity, I have rolled out my economic development strategy. And I would say it's very informed by my experiences down in Windham County. I have two programs. One is called Invest Vermont, and the other is called Innovate Vermont.
Okay.
Invest Vermont is really focused on our downtowns, village centers, regional centers, population centers, and how critically important it is for us to make sure they are vital and growing and vibrant. And I'm going to tell a story of the city of Barrie, where 6 years ago, this was a town really in challenge. We had many empty storefronts, not a lot of sense of hope and optimism. Government pulled together, and we did a strategic public investment in infrastructure. I'm passionate about infrastructure.
Well, that's really important.
It's critically important. Certainly, I learned how much we have been deferring our maintenance in the transportation field. But when we think about what the public sector provides as a foundation for private sector investment, it really comes down to infrastructure. So in Barre, we put $19 million into public water, wastewater, stormwater, a new Main Street with a pedestrian orientation. And within 6 years, we've leveraged over $45 million of private investment. And if you go to Barre now, you're going to see a community on the move, a community with new businesses, young entrepreneurs, new affordable housing, because we had a partnership with affordable housing community, as well as using new tax credits and historic tax credits and new market tax credits, and investment in state offices. So it's a town where we have growth in the manufacturing, commercial, residential, and retail sectors, and optimistic about their future. I've seen a very similar pattern in St. Albans, in Winooski, and this is what I want to bring to key areas. So my plan with Invest Vermont is to choose 3 towns within my first year, and to bring my administrative together as a team devoted to focusing on those communities. Those communities are going to have to fit our criteria. I'm not choosing them. They're going to have to show leadership and demonstrate a champion, a plan, a vision, and how we can mobilize resources, existing resources, to actually target strategic investment for economic stimulus. So that's Invest Vermont. I think I am very...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the towns you're looking at, they're distributed by, would you try to distribute them by area, by size, by what?
We're going to develop criteria for who needs the help the most. I'm going to look at demographic and economic data, but I'm also going to look for local leadership, a team ready to dig in, because it takes both. And that's what I've seen effective in many communities.
And one of the things I would just say is that, state input, like what you're talking about, into a community the size of Bellows Falls or Chester or Springfield, is going to have a huge impact. Where, it might not impact a Burlington. You wouldn't maybe not see it as much, but here it would make an incredible impact.
I spent most of yesterday in Springfield.
Yeah, Springfield is another. I mean, that size town. I was sort of getting to because those I think these small to middle-sized towns are really suffering because they don't have that influence or the something to get things rolling.
You need things to get things rolling, and you need people ready. And I see it wherever I go. I've been in Bennington, I've been in Wilmington, and Brattleboro, of course, is really focused a lot on a strategic, comprehensive economic development strategy for Windham County. Very impressed with the workforce development program that they've initiated. That I think is a real model where we have institutions of higher learning collaborating with businesses to figure out what do the businesses need and how can we provide those students, because it's about connecting the dots. And this relates to my second part of my economic development strategy called Innovate Vermont. And that's really recognizing my focus on 4 strategic sectors of our economy: advanced manufacturing, high-tech industry, and what I call the green economy, which is both renewable energy and efficiency, as well as our farm, food, forest economy. And I'm going to look for innovation and set up a task force with each of those sectors, and in my first 90 days, ask those task force to come up with recommendations for how we move forward into a new economy with those 4 sectors. So these 2 things go together because there may be recommendations that help communities looking for new opportunities.
And again, I'll come back to smallness. I know, I think people like to think big, but Vermont really works really well with small businesses and small communities and I think that's like you said earlier, this is why we moved here. It's like, it's the individual effort and the small people and not small people, but you know what I mean.
Hey, I'm small.
But you know what I mean. It's like small groups of people getting together to innovate, and I think there's that energy here that we can do that. But again, I'm hoping that these models you're talking about will be able to be replicated in small groups, and they'll encourage small groups to innovate.
Well, I've got to tell you exactly what you're talking about is what inspires me to want to continue to lead our state forward, because I see what's happening around this state, and we have huge, huge challenges, but we also have that scale where when we're all committed behind a united mission, like we were during Irene, we can do incredible things. And that's what I think is so special about Vermont and why I want to continue leading.
Great, thank you. Some of the things we've talked about, it's just, we've talked about with other candidates are general sort of subjects that I'll ask you these questions and we can move on quickly, but how about education and Act 46? Where are you as far as the regrouping of the and combining of school districts?
Well, first I want to say that to me, education is the most important thing we do for our future. Our kids are our future. And I want to make sure we keep a strong public school system here. I think it's one of the most important assets that we have for continuing to have people move to Vermont because of our strong public schools. I have learned certainly that Act 46 has an opportunity to have communities come together with really difficult decisions and discussions, which I believe we need to have because of our declining enrollment. We have to look at how the size of our student population is driving costs.
Right.
For some communities, the idea of a unified governance model really does make sense. For my own school district, and my husband's on the school board, my dad was on the school board a decade ago, we've been moving in this direction. We're a unified school, but we have, until now, 7 different school boards, 7 different budgets for 1,800 students. And it's inefficient and it's ineffective. And actually, I think students will gain access to sharing services, sharing teachers, having one budget, cost effective, but also valuable educational opportunity. That said, as I've been running for governor and coming to communities and listening to people, particularly Putney, folks were very passionate about their schools, very concerned about the undermining of what they feel so passionately engaged with their own school, and a sense that they will lose that if they become part of a larger district. So I'm listening. I believe that as governor, it will be the discussion of the State Board of Education, and as governor, I'll be appointing 4 new members. I think we've moved from a place of probably the places where it made the most sense, moving in that direction relatively quickly. But for the rest of the state, especially our special small communities, we need to be flexible. We need to go slow. We know that one size does not fit all, and that's my attitude.
I think maybe that's where people got worried. It's like, does everyone? I like that you're saying it's a discussion, and I hope people would see it that way.
It's a discussion, and we do have to think differently. You know, I think a lot about that. There are schools that really, the population of the number of students is so small, and sadly, they are not getting the quality of education that other schools are. So it's about equity.
Yes, exactly.
It is about equity for some communities, and you know, there are many small schools where there's great success, but there are also many that are not, and we need to be thinking about that. And I think we need to think differently about what our schools can become. I don't want to ever close a school, but I do think there may be opportunities to rethink and maybe repurpose some parts of a school. Let's say, for example, we have a K-8 school where the population is dwindling and projected to go down even further. And instead, we transform what is in that school to an early education center, perhaps through the 3rd grade, and then the rest of the school is utilized for other purposes: oral health care, social services and mental health services, and senior services for seniors. Because right now in our small rural communities, we have seniors aging at home who don't have access to services. So as we think differently, we can actually reduce pressure on the property tax by taking a smaller portion of these community assets, which are currently our schools, but making them multi-generational facilities, different way of thinking, because we have to think differently. We can't pretend the student enrollment decline isn't an issue to solve. And I really have confidence in Vermonters that they do come together. They roll up their sleeves, they have tough conversations, and we move forward as a community. And that's what I'd be looking forward to helping to lead, in a respectful conversation, but not dictating what it must look like. But I want to mention something even more important to me as the next governor with respect to education. And it's about what's happening after high school. Because when you look at the data, Vermont does actually a great job getting kids through high school. We have like the 2nd highest graduation rates in the country. But when it comes to education and training beyond high school, we rank at the bottom of the country, near the bottom. This, I believe, is critically important. It's important both because of what I hear from employers, that they can't find qualified workers, and what I know happens in this 21st century if you stop your education at high school. You know, it used to be enough to have a high school diploma, and it's not anymore. But, you know, 4 out of 10 of our students are not going on past high school. I've been talking a lot with students as I travel. I heard from a student named Amanda actually talking about student debt. She paid $800 a month in her student loans, more than her own rent.
Yeah.
It's very hard for students to carry that kind of load, not to mention parents. But I also heard from some young people in the in White River Junction area, the young liberals, and they talked about their peers who hadn't gone on past high school. And what I recall about the conversation concerns me greatly, about a lost generation of kids who don't have opportunity because they haven't continued.
Yeah.
So that's why I've rolled out what I call Vermont Promise. It's modeled off of 5 other states committing to 2 years of tuition-free college at Community College of Vermont or Vermont Technical College. Combined with those 2 years, we will have a volunteer mentoring program. This is the mission that I want to get everybody very excited about, helping more Vermonters continue their education and training beyond high school so they can be qualified for those jobs. They can be the workforce that so many businesses are looking for and can't find. They can have livable wage jobs. We can grow the economy, but more importantly, break the cycle of poverty. Because poverty is growing across this state. We have 20,000 children in poverty. The homeless population is growing, including among children. That's what worries me, and that's a commitment that I make to the future, that we not leave Vermonters behind.
Well, it's an interesting thing because it's one of the things we've been talking about here in Bellows Falls as a community, because it's also people who don't go to college or don't have jobs lack purpose in their life, and then they lose
Hope.
their direction, they lose their hope. We've had a higher incidence of emerging adult suicides, opioid addiction, all these things, dangerous behaviors, people dying from accidents. All of those things, I'm pretty convinced, are directly tied to that lack of hope and that lack of purpose in their life.
I agree wholeheartedly. You know, I have 2 kids, one who's gone through high school, and I coached, as I said, for 13 years. And I see the kids that went beyond high school with their education, and I see those that didn't. And I see them in the police bars, and I see them without hope. And if we don't invest in the future of our kids, where are we going? And it's a win-win-win. Of course, that education and training and access to a career, access to something for their future. But also it's a win for our economy, it's a win for the businesses. And you know, we know that data shows that when you have an associate's degree, you on average earn $12,000 more per year. A full bachelor's degree, on average $35,000 more per year. So we know that it's going to give economic opportunity. We know businesses can't find workers. So for me, this is a top priority. And it's a mission I want to get the whole state behind.
I agree. I would support you in that wholeheartedly.
Thanks.
Yes. And I guess we come a little bit around because of we do have a problem with opium and opioids and addiction, and we're on the I-91 corridor. We get a lot of things coming north and they're almost daily busts now, where they're picking up people with 500 bags of heroin, and I guess I would ask you what you see. What would you do about this, or how do we approach that problem?
Well, I think this is an epidemic, and it is a top concern and a top priority. And it's hitting every community of this state. You don't have to feel unique. Different communities differently. Some are affected by crime and theft. Some are, I was just in Bennington talking to the hospital. They have to build a special new unit for infants being born opiate addicted. And this is taking us over if we don't get on top of it. And I will address this as governor as a crisis. And I'm going to appoint a person like I was during Irene, someone in the governor's office whose job it is to think 24/7 about what we are doing to address this challenge, and to think across the multifaceted needs that this crisis addresses. I'm very inspired by Rutland Project Vision, which you may have heard of, but it's about it's really got two parts to it. One is in the police department, where they have co-located in their enforcement unit community policing, probation and parole, domestic violence prevention, mental health services, who work as a team. And that's what I know we need, so that everyone is understanding when there's a call and it isn't, and it's somebody who hasn't had their medication, the police doesn't go out and make things worse. The right person addresses that incident.
That's a good point, yeah.
So paralleling the unique and innovative and I think very effective co-location and teamwork that they're doing is a team all-in community effort, which was started 3 years ago to address substance abuse, particularly opiates. And it's the same idea as Irene. They're all in, and they have monthly meetings where 100 people show up and talk about what's happening and how to work together. So that's the community role. That's the enforcement role. I think we need to continue a very important discussion with the healthcare providers around prescribing opiates, as well as with the pharmaceutical industry around what drugs are being developed, not only for treating pain, but for treating addiction. This is a discussion that has to happen beyond Vermont, and I'm very proud that our governor has been leading on this. But for Vermont, I'm going to have someone whose job it is to, what happens when you work for the governor, you can make a phone call and get help and get a response.
Right.
And you can help make things happen quickly. That's how we got out of Irene. A team, thinking constantly about how to address this. And without that, there's so many problems. You have to have someone identified, and hopefully a team whose job it is to address that. And I can't say exactly how we're going to solve it, but without that kind of focused attention and leadership, I think it will overwhelm us.
Yeah, I mean, we're almost at that point now. We're almost at that tipping point but I do think a lot of communities are getting organized around the same way. We have community social workers that are embedded with the police, and it's sort of, that idea is catching on, and I think it will work. But you're right. Any input from the state is much more powerful than just a couple people getting together at a local.
And also having all of the different jurisdictions understanding and finding best practices and learning from one another and communicating.
Exactly.
A lot of times it needs communication and collaboration and coordination. And those are things that I get and have had to do throughout my service and are really important to address crises like this.
Good, thank you. Have we talked about the budget?
Well, you could never end talking about the budget. We have many budgetary problems. I've had to balance a $600 million budget. I've had to manage the budget after Irene. The budget is never easy to solve.
Right.
And I think it's important to know that the state budget is not exactly a correlation with our economic growth, because the state budget is impacted by problems like we just talked about.
Right.
It's spikes when crises hit, like opiates, or Irene, or homelessness. And so my goal is going to be to focus on meeting the needs in the best way we can and thinking collectively about how we pay for it. Each year there's a discussion about raising this tax or this fee. And I think we actually need to look at comprehensive tax reform. Excuse me.
Yes.
Because we haven't really had that discussion, and it's a hard one.
I agree. And I guess that's what my next question while you're having it would be, do you have a general philosophy of, because things do need to get paid for. Everyone wants lower taxes, but everyone wants
higher services.
Higher services.
That's right. I remember someone telling me, lower my taxes, but not my services.
Right.
And sometimes people actually don't understand that those are connected.
Yeah, they really are pretty much connected directly. And,
well, certainly tax fairness is critical, and how we pay based on ability to pay is a critical underpinning, I guess, of
Yeah.
my values.
So, as we're going along with all these things that have happened in the last several months, and especially in the last weeks, how are you feeling about gun control and what should happen as far as gun control in Vermont? This is a general question.
Well, I will tell you that I am very concerned about the epidemic of gun violence across this country, and I feel sadly that Vermont is not immune to that. I know, when I first started this race, there was a tragedy in a church in Charleston,
Yeah.
and then there was Planned Parenthood in Colorado and San Bernardino, and now we grieve for Orlando. And I believe wholeheartedly in the Second Amendment and the rights of law-abiding citizens to own guns. I am a strong supporter of our hunting heritage. But I think we need common sense gun safety, and I support background checks for all gun sales. I will tell you that this hasn't usually been a topic that people running for governor have raised. In fact, I've been told I'm the first person to have raised it, and I did early on in my campaign, and at that time others had expressed that they felt our gun laws were fine. But I'm going to tell you where the problem lies in Vermont, because some people say we don't have a problem. And I want you to know that it really is behind closed doors. And it's about domestic violence, something that concerns me greatly, something that I know is a silent epidemic. And in 2013, Vermont had the 8th highest rate of domestic violence in the country, and most of those were with guns. You also mentioned suicides. We have a high rate of suicides also with guns. And what I know is that in states where they have background checks for all handgun sales, 46% fewer women are shot to death by their intimate partners. There is also almost a 50% reduction in gun-related suicides, as well as police officers being killed by guns that are not their own. So I think background checks are very common sense. They're about keeping guns in the right hands and out of the wrong hands.
I think even gun owners agree with that. I think most people, because to me, it seems like that's the baseline, and that seems very common sense, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to stand strong on it.
I know
there's a lot of opinions about that, and I agree with you. And I hope we can allay fears that anyone would be interested in taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, because that is not my goal. But it is my goal to see what we can do to keep them out of the wrong hands.
Right.
And of course, you talk about the opiate trade, and I hear about opiates for guns trades. So if we just need to make sure we do everything we can to know that the people purchasing guns, at a gun store, a federally licensed gun dealer has to have background checks.
Right.
And we just want to extend the very same requirement to all gun sales here in Vermont. And I think it can make a difference, and I want to get that done.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Thank you for coming out here today. It's been great talking with you. I hope that, I wish you great luck in your campaign, and I hope that we get to talk again, because I'm hoping that whoever makes it through the primaries will come back.
We will be back in Bellows Falls. I was here before Robert McBride took on the incredible work of the downtown revitalization, and what a difference a champion can make.
Yeah.
I want to say I want to be a champion for this state. I love Vermont. I am a candidate who has the passion, a vision, and most importantly, the experience to lead our state forward and to get things done. And that's what I want to do for Vermont. I feel privileged to have had this opportunity to run for office, and I want people to know they can count on me to be their advocate and their leader. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Sue.